I may tweet out that I may accrue you all in one place in one time, that the dissemination of the information can begin. I am Fast Eddie here, locking in for tonight's 6 or 7 game slate, depending on to whom you listen and where you are looking. We have the 6 p.m. main slate on FanDuel Eastern Time, 7 p.m. On DraftKings and Yahoo. So what I'm going to do here is basically start by just talking about FanDuel for the first bit here, answering some questions from anyone who happens to have them. Talk about some FanDuel specific plays. Obviously, talk about that one game in question. I am refreshing this, and somehow there's some pretty peculiar ass video going on here. Interesting. Wondering if people can hear me. The video is pretty jacked up on YouTube. My stuff seems to be running okay. It says I'm on, but the video I'm looking at does not appear to be the one. So let me poke around and see. I am seeing strange things. I see someone complaining about Jonah Bolden, so we have to be in pretty close to the right place. Interesting. Something is not running terribly well. You can hear me or you can see me. I see this hodgepodge of shit in the background. I'm good. Okay, that's strange. That's not what I see, but sure, I'll retweet this out and then we will get this road on the show, so to speak. And they're doing what they say there. Okay, tweeting, and then we will get into talking about the FanDuel. We'll do that for what'll be about 10 minutes. And then everything is fine on your end on YouTube. That's really strange. For me, when I go to the YouTube screen, I see some random stuff. But you're saying I'm live, so let's do that voodoo that we do so well. So, yeah. I don't think we're going to answer the phone right now. Okay. So again, the game that will only be taking place on FanDuel is the Bucks visiting the Thunder. Is the highest paced game on the late slate, or on the full slate on FanDuel. Burke Bayless FanDuel chalk thoughts. Yeah, I mean, I would much rather play Burke, I think, than Bayless to save some money, have similar upside, and be a little bit less chalky. But they're both on their face pretty strong plays. But again, let's talk about FanDuel specifically for a little bit. And you're mentioning the 2-point guard, so you are looking at this game, which only really applies there. I do like Giannis, and I do like Westbrook. I do think even at their prices, they both have they always have big upside, but this is spots that I think are above average spots for both of those players. If they were the same amount of money, I would slightly prefer Russell Westbrook. I have him projected for a few more fantasy points. But certainly no objection to running either of those super expensive guys. Looking at the rest of these teams, it gets kind of dicey really quickly. Eric Bledsoe's been on an incredibly good tear the last couple weeks. His last game was his worst game out of the last 8 or so, where he had only like 1.1 fantasy points a minute and only ended up with like 35. But he's been a monster. 7,800. Just tournaments for me, and again, liking Giannis, another feather out of his cap. So, fine in tournaments you want to run Eric Bledsoe today, but the price has now come up to where it's appropriate. I would rather play Chris Middleton at 6,400 if I was looking to spike one of those guys in a tournament. I would only play either one if I was not playing Giannis. I don't really want to play Malcolm Brogdon in this matchup. I don't really like playing him over 6K at all out of cash. In cash, it certainly makes some sense, obviously, as a defined role, but never a guy who spikes like the super upside 50, and even the 40s are pretty rare, while as he crawls into an occasional 30, 32, 33, and this game does have a nice pace on it. I would rather go with Andrew Wiggins or someone else of his ilk, where I think I can get a larger upside than I can get out of him in tournaments. I don't have an issue with Brook Lopez in a tournament. At least there's some sort of upside there. I would rather play Brook Lopez than Steven Adams. It's a somewhat positive matchup for Brook. It's pretty bad for Steven Adams, who has struggled historically against the Bucks and Brolo, and just does a little more chasing, doesn't get to live under the basket as much as he would like, which maximizes his fantasy points. Not a big fan of Jeremy Grant at 6-1. You can obviously play Paul George on FanDuel at 10-9. On FanDuel, that price is a little more reasonable due to his ability to accrue huge numbers of steals, which obviously can pay off that tag, but I like Russell Westbrook at 12-3 well more than I like Paul George at 10-9. I like Giannis at 11-7 well more than I like Paul George at 10-9. I don't really want to spend the $5,700 on Dennis Schroeder. And again, this is a Thunder team where the defense is starting to round a little more into form. Yep. So, all right, let's talk about other guys on FanDuel I particularly like. I do like Trey Burke a lot. I'm going to refresh our ownership in a second and take a look at that. But Trey Burke at his price, Ntilikina will get the start. It is worth pointing out, I haven't seen this mentioned that much, I believe Ntilikina fouled out of that last game, and I want to confirm that before I go too deep down this rabbit hole. But a lot of people are like, they started Ntilikina, but it was a ceremonial start, and Trey Burke was the guy who ended up getting all the time. And I think I recall saying, yeah, he fouled out in 19 minutes. So we do not have an accurate picture as how far the minutes are going to be distributed between the point guards when he doesn't foul out in 19 minutes, and it's safe to guess that Trey Burke is not going to necessarily see the preponderance of minutes that he saw in the last game when he saw 33. Trey Burke is 31% just checked. Thank you. I still like Trey Burke at 31%, especially on FanDuel, because again, you can drop it. And he's a guy who very easily does have 40-point upside. But it is worth mentioning, this is a real shit matchup. If you went back, I don't have it in front of me because I had to do a hard reset, which is one of the reasons I was a minute or two late. But if you went back and looked at the game when they played earlier this year in October, the Knicks had one player who scored more than 23 fantasy points, and it was Damian Dotson. Like, it's a very difficult matchup. Now, it's not that hard. You will get some people who do a little better than that, but this is an excellent, deliberate Heat team that isn't the best for fantasy production. So, when you talk about him or playing Jared, you have to deal with the fact that the Jazz as well, certainly a team that not overly disposed to giving up huge amounts of fantasy production, but we do have a nice sample of Bayless against them versus any other team, because again, he threw up 40 minutes against them. So cash, you would play Jared Bayless. Minutes, obviously, much more secure. But the upside is a fair bit limited there. I think that was actually a little more than I'd expect out of him. He played 40 minutes, and had 30-some-odd fantasy points. I would generally project him for 40 minutes, closer to 29 or 30. He's not, won't be that productive against the Jazz in general. So that was already sort of a ceiling-ish game for him, and the price has come up a little bit, and he's going to be mega owned. So if I have to play one of those guys, and I don't think you have to play either of those guys, I would be a little more inclined towards playing Trey Burke. Other guys on FanDuel we should touch on real quick. I like Dwayne Wade at 5,000 at shooting guard. Last time in the Garden, even if you're not building in for the narrative, certainly a spot I like for him. His minutes tend to be guaranteed in that mid-20s range. It is obviously a phenomenal spot. Against the Knicks on the road, a little better chance the game stays close. You want Tyler Johnson to be out, which I don't believe we have confirmed. I think he is still sitting on questionable. I don't think he's going to play in this one, though I've heard it go back and forth. The Knicks are starting exactly who we thought they would start, which is Ntilikina, Hardaway, Knox, Thomas, and Vonleh. So Ntilikina better in cash than Burke, but worse than Jared Bayless. If you were looking at those guys, let me just run through some other plays real quick, because obviously we're on late time. LaMarcus Aldridge, probably my favorite play on the slate, pretty close to it. If you're going against Washington, uber rebounding upside. DeRozan out. I don't think the ownership will have time to catch up to the fact that DeRozan is out this far before a non-late swap site like FanDuel. So LaMarcus Aldridge probably the first guy into my lineups on FanDuel. I don't think we have final news on Rudy Gay. I think we may still be sitting on game time decision for Rudy there. But either way, Sans DeRozan in an excellent matchup with the Wizards. I'm a pretty ginormous fan. We still have game time decision. Davis Bertans is in, if that matters to you. But having DeRozan out makes him an absolute, pretty close to a must for me. And again, I don't think the field will have time to react as quickly as they might like. Let's see, Brandon Ingram, Justice Winslow, Karl Anthony Towns. Obviously, talked about Towns a lot before the last game against Utah, and said that I liked him a lot there. Even if you had Teague and or Rose in, I would have still had a fair amount of affection for Karl Anthony Towns. Watching that last game between him and Rudy Gobert, you could see him deliberately making attempts to get him out from the rim, drag him to the line. You saw Towns taking a pile more of three-pointers in that first time this year. I think he went 5 of 9 for 3 when they played again the day before yesterday. He went 2 of 5 from 3. He makes a real effort to do that. And again, you now remove Rose and Teague, and he just becomes more and more the focal point of the offense. So Towns certainly makes a lot of sense in there as well, too. Rondo, obviously the chalk. Price has come up a bit. Andy's the chalk. Likely a very good play. Phoenix is obviously exceptional. Is going to just be handling the ball a ton for an understaffed Lakers team. You can reliably expect the minutes to be huge as they were last game. The Lakers not on a back-to-back. The Clippers and Knicks play again tomorrow. No, it's not the Clippers and the Knicks. That doesn't make sense. Maybe it is the Lakers and the Knicks. I gotta check my thing again. But anyhow, we are coming down to lock, and I want to see if there was anyone else. It is not a slate in which there are a ton of guys who I absolutely love. It is the Clippers who play again tomorrow. They played early and they play again tomorrow, so that obviously not relevant for us. But the Lakers do not, and for that reason, big fan of Rondo, big fan of Brandon Ingram. Will just have extra responsibility on his shoulders. Kyle Kuzma will make an excellent play in the event he plays. I love him. I do not consider playing him on FanDuel in the absence of news complete insanity. It has paid off several times this year with Embiid and other guys who, if you played them on the early lock sites, you can get them at 2% owned. I don't think you need to. I think you should already have Aldridge in a spot, absolutely. But if you wanted to play, Aldridge and Kuzma in your one lineup, you are grabbing yourself a pretty unique upside and a chance to have a monster scoring guy in an ideal matchup with very low ownership behind him. I mentioned Winslow already, but I really like him at small forward. I would prefer Justice to Josh Richardson, who, again, very much in play himself. My rankings are up on the site. You can check them out now. We are coming up to lock, my friends, and we are there. So we have locked. Ingram or Winslow on FanDuel GPP. Would now be too late to answer that question for you, although I don't know if either of those are 7 p.m. games. Let's see. We can now slow down and talk about the slate a little bit more properly. Sorry for some of our technical difficulties getting ready there. I guess let's go back into discussing things game by game a little bit and try to get there. Sorry for the questions I missed and all the hullabaloo there. So now eschewing the Bucks visiting the Thunder, we have 6 games remaining on the slate. Let's start by talking about them now. The Jazz and the Timberwolves. And again, this is a spot where I do think we have some fairly predictable production out of these two teams. Let's talk about the Timberwolves a little bit more. So yes, Bayless will get the start again. We have no Derrick Rose. We have no Jeff Teague. This leaves you in an obvious situation where he ends up being, number 3, 4, 5 option on offense, but the 1 and the 2 are so demonstrably ahead of the rest of the field. I think you want big pieces of them. I really like Wiggins and Towns. No matter how you look at it. Common sense in the fact that Josh Okogie and Taj Gibson and Jared Bayless are not going to take a pile of shots. If you put a gun to my head and said, who will take more shots, Okogie plus Bayless plus Gibson or Andrew Wiggins, I would have to sit there for a while because I don't want my head to get blown off. That's going to be a complicated question, and those numbers are both going to be in the 22 to 25 range. But we can fairly reasonably expect a ton of our production here to come from Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns, and I like both those guys. It is not an ideal matchup for Wiggins. They have more defensive solutions for him, certainly, whereas Towns is a matchup problem for roughly everyone in the universe. But Wiggins' price is just too cheap. 6,400 on FanDuel is too cheap, and 5,900 on DK. I presume we have him projected as one of the highest owned plays of the day. If he's not in the top 3, I'll be pretty shocked, but that's appropriate. It is a tough matchup for him, but he is just going to bludgeon by volume his name into the value conversation. We have him well lower than I would have thought. We have him as the 14th ranked player at 17% owned. Should that happen to be the case, that's a stellar buy. He had, I believe, somewhere north of 40 fantasy points last game, 42, 43 the day before yesterday. And that's about what I project him for, again, based just purely on the volume. In that game, if you're curious, he shot 8 for 24. That's about what I project him to take for shots and make for shots today. It is not a great matchup, but just the volume and the minutes should be there in what I expect to be a close game. So I like Andrew Wiggins quite a bit, and if he's only going to be 17% owned on DK, and presumably not much more on FanDuel, I'll go ahead and click on this useful thing here and tell you what the number is on FanDuel. Yeah, I'm a pretty massive fan of that. And also, if you went back and you took a look to earlier this year, you would notice that he had a good game in the first game, again, just bludgeoning his way into value. I think that game he was like 8 for 17. I'll go double check when I get a second. And Wiggins, 11% on FanDuel at 6,400. Tyler Johnson out. Okay, so that does not change a ton, but we'll go to that game next. Since, again, all the games but one are starting within a half hour of lock. So we will skip up to that game, as I do have a little bit more interest in that game, as should you. But for the rest of this one, real quickly, no issue with you playing a Kogi on FanDuel at 4,400 where you can drop him. I like him on FanDuel because he is a guy, if he gets there, it's going to be steals and blocks and the like. Taj Gibson, I don't mind playing on either site at 4,500. Still can certainly get there at that number. Again, not an ideal matchup for him, but 4,500 is cheap enough with his expected minutes. He makes sense. Jared Bayless, just fine in cash, just fine in tournaments because he's so cheap. Though in tournaments, I would rather pivot away to Trey Burke, even at 20% less ownership. But even guys like Dion Waiters, who I think has a decent upside. Now that you have Tyler Johnson out, I expect Waiters to be returned from... I think someone was telling me I have to refresh the ownership, or I clicked on... Someone is saying he is 25%. That's not... I'll refresh. Or I'm using the tool wrong, which I don't think I am. 25%, there it is. Rondo 62, Bayless 35, Burke 26. Okay, is what we're looking at for the ownerships now. So we'll do a little daddy-like in a little bit. But I do like Wiggins, and I would be on top of 25%. Yeah, not a ton else to add there. I could talk a lot about the Towns Gobert thing. It's actually a lot of fun for me to watch and break down his tape. Gobert himself across the ball, certainly not out of play. I like him only very slightly less than Towns on FanDuel, and even less slightlier on DraftKings, where he's down at 8,500. It is a fine matchup for him. You frequently get 18 and 18 out of him in spots like this, so he's just fine. I wouldn't have as much as I have Towns. It's simply because of the usage situation. You still have Donovan Mitchell in there, and Ingles and Rubio, and plenty of other guys doing more there, whereas Towns simply has a better shot of taking 20 shots than Gobert does. So I do project Towns for a good number more. But it's a very good spot for Rudy Gobert as well. Randomly seeing 20 and 20 and 5 blocks out of him here, would not be random, point of fact. I like Crowder a little more than Favors, actually, in this spot, were I to have to pick between the two of them in tournaments, but neither of them where they're all over the fives. We're not down to that $4,400 Crowder spot that we get once in a while, and it's not that brilliant of a spot. Ingles obviously hasn't looked great, fine in tournaments. Certainly the absence of Robert Covington bodes well for him, but not a brilliant spot. Don't mind Donovan Mitchell. Would rather play Bradley Beal where they are close to the same price on DK. On FanDuel, you're spending a grand more to get up to Brad Beal, and there's plenty of compelling shooting guard options, many cheaper and a couple more expensive. We can talk about James Harden in a minute. But again, fairly ambivalent on Donovan Mitchell. Not the greatest spot, not the worst spot, and the price has obviously come up With Rubio back, what are the odds of getting 55 out of Donovan Mitchell, which is the number where I start pumping my fist when his price is almost all the way up at $9K. So I would rather play Devin Booker for $400 or $500 less. There's other places I would rather go, but certainly Donovan Mitchell not out of play. And Ricky Rubio, again, is basically playing 22, 24 minutes since returning from injury. We would need to see that change before I would be incredibly inclined to ride that train. Oh, I think that's enough of that there game. Yeah, but again, no issue with any amount of Bayless you want to play, though he's going to be popular, and I think the upside is a little bit limited. And again, our most recent ownership projection was 35%. That's a big number. So, yeah. Let's go ahead and move on. We will skip around a little bit today in response to your questions and primacy. Let's go ahead and talk about the Heat visiting the Knicks. One of the slower games left on the slate, it should be pointed out. Most of the games are ranging in the 220 area. This one closer to 210, though a lot of the guys we're interested in are priced very affordably. I like Justice Winslow on the spot. The price is just too cheap, and the matchup is very good. I like him a little more on FanDuel, where he and many members of the Heat are priced a little better. Actually, I think basically every member of the Heat is priced proportionately better on FanDuel, except for Bam Adebayo, who's $600 cheaper on DK, apples to apples, which would actually be cheaper. But everyone else is priced a little better on FanDuel. And having Tyler Johnson out does make things a little better. We lost... let's see, the game before last, we had Dion Waiters out with a migraine. And we saw the minutes move around a lot, where you saw like Rodney re-enter the rotation for 10 minutes and Kelly Olynyk play 4 minutes, but a lot of other guys got themselves 2 or 3 extra minutes. So having Tyler Johnson out, I imagine they go back to starting Rodney, who's going to take a lot of that time. But it does mean, in theory, a couple extra minutes for everyone, all the way down, in theory, to James Johnson. It doesn't affect Hassan Whiteside and Bam Adebayo, who are going to chop up 48 minutes. But everyone else in the rotation, in theory, gets a little bit of a cookie. In that last game, with one of the backcourt members missing, Dwayne Wade played 28 minutes instead of his normal 23, 25, 26. That makes a lot of a difference. But all these guys obviously have a stellar matchup against a moribund Knicks team. So, like Winslow more than Richardson. Winslow, you could even throw in a cash lineup. I would have no issue with. Richardson, just fine in tournaments, but would remain there for me. James Johnson, I'm absolutely fine with at 3,700 on either side. Really like him on FanDuel as a potential drop. I'm giving thought to Derrick Jones Jr. I don't think I want to go there today. I'll be disinclined towards that. Either of the centers work for me. I would prefer Hassan Whiteside on FanDuel, and I prefer Bam Adebayo on DK. Whichever one of them gets the preponderance of time here is going to be in an excellent spot. Right now I have Hassan Whiteside for 28 minutes and 41 fantasy points. So I'm a pretty big fan of Whiteside in this spot. I like him a little more than DeAndre Jordan, who isn't entirely out of play for me. I don't like him as much as some of the super spend-up options, and I do think it's a night I want to spend up on one of the 3 monster centers between the 2 guys we've already discussed, and then Vooch, who we'll get to in a little bit. But in that mid-range, I do think Hassan Whiteside has an absolutely enormous upside in what's clearly a very good spot. And on DK, 4,400 for Bam Adebayo. I think Whiteside does get the time here, but certainly not impossible. It splits 22-26 or 20-28, or Whiteside gets in some foul trouble. And at 4,400, if you told me that Bam was going to get 28, 30 minutes against the Knicks, that's obviously a number he can shatter, and the ownership won't really be there. Also, shout out to Dion Waiters, who, again, missed a game with a migraine, but is completely removed from the injury report. He missed the last game, the Cavs game. But before that, we had steadily been seeing the minutes increase. Apparently, basically, like going on Instagram and telling your coach he's a dick and saying you need more playing time, which is just hilarious. Dion Waiters basically signs his contract, gets paid $1 million, more than $1 million, gets paid as whatever $15 million a year, misses massive amounts of time with tons of injuries, This is an incredibly deep team, and he comes back and other guys are getting knocked out of the rotation. He's back like 5 days, and he's like, yeah, I should be starting. The Dion needs more time. Shout out to him for that level of hubris, but pride goeth before a fall. Again, Frank Ntilikina is not a good fantasy basketball player, and the Heat is not a good team to play fantasy basketball against. I like starting $3,700, $3,800 Frank Ntilikina. Not out of play from, again, FanDuel obviously makes more sense for obvious reasons. Would rather play Burke for the upside. Would rather play Bayless for the safety and cash, or even the upside in tournaments. So not completely out of play. I think he plays 28 or 30 minutes here most times. But to be fair, in 28 or 30 minutes against an average opponent, Frankie, would project for about 19 fantasy points. And then this is the Heat. So things are going to have to break your way to make that work. Tim Hardaway Jr., the good news is all of a sudden minutes are spiking back up. So first, before looking at my notes, just looking at the slate when I started prep this morning, Tim Hardaway, $6,000. Pretty excited about 5,900, same price as Wiggins on DK. Thought he might be an ideal pivot there. The Heat just eat his lunch. I don't have the game by game in front of me, but it is literally his worst split in the NBA pretty significantly. I think he has achieved more than 24 fantasy points against them once in his last 12 games, and that one he got like 30. Like, they just mess his shit up. So, still not out of play for me, simply because shooter's going to shoot. And again, his minutes for a while were 25, 28, 27, 28, 25, 20, and they were just down, and they had gone away from the first couple months of the year where Fizdale, he was the one dependable guy where they threw the 36 at him. Last couple games it's been back, and they've been throwing that time at him again. So that's the good and the bad of Tim Hardaway. Still hard for me to love him, but not out of play in tournaments if he just has the possibility of jacking up a gabillion shots. And again, not having Canner in the starting lineup, or in theory playing at all, really makes Hardaway much better as well, simply because Cantor is a centerpiece of the offense when he's out there, and Noah Vonleh is not. Neither is Lance Thomas, by the way. So when you look at this particular, I guess my point is this. Think about, no, I will not take your phone call. When you, all right, you know what, ring her off. I never ring her off, but you got ring her off, bitch. When you look at this lineup, these are some dudes who don't want to shoot the ball, and then Tim Hardaway and Kevin Knox. Like Frank Ntilikina, Lance Thomas, and Noah Vonleh. Vonleh has some sort of offensive game. He's added a much better three-pointer. He's still below average, but has some offensive skills. But both Frank Ntilikina and Lance Thomas are not guys who are going to put up a lot of shots, which means that Tim Hardaway and Kevin Knox are guys who are going to put up a lot of shots. So how exactly to combine that with what is truly a very bad matchup for both of them is up to you, but there is an upside for those guys, and if I'm building 150 lineups, I probably have, I'd probably say 15 or 20 Hardaway, 10-12% Hardaway, and 5-10% Knox, because just at their prices, there's a real chance they can volume bludgeon their way to where they need to get. Again, the presence of Andrew Wiggins undermines them a little bit. Lonzo Trier, don't really want to spend $5,100 on. I think most likely conclusion for him is 24 minutes or so. Gets hard for him to pay off that price. And again, matchup is El Shito. DK, I think he's still significantly cheaper. Yahoo, I think he's still significantly cheaper. Don't recall. Same thing with Damian Dotson. A little more in play in tournaments for me. If I'm going to play Dotson or Trier, I'll save $1,500 and play Dotson. And Mitch Robinson's still not out of play for me, especially DK, where he's $4,100. All you need is some Vonleh foul trouble, and he gets all the time in the world. And Noah Vonleh, not a guy who stays out of foul trouble very frequently. So certainly someone we want to look at. Let's go and talk about the Spurs and the Wizards. I love LaMarcus Aldridge. I love LaMarcus Aldridge because he's the master of forgotten. It's like one of those guys you go in the park and you see someone practicing their bow staff skills, and you respect them for their patronage and their allegiance to a dead art. That's LaMarcus Aldridge with some sick 18-foot turnaround jumpers, especially well priced on FanDuel, for whom I assume there are some number of later slates in which you can implement him. I would strongly advise doing so at 8,400. Also 8,400 on DK, but power forward eligible. It's a tough go tonight on Yahoo at center, where you have Towns, obviously. You have really, really underpriced Hassan Whiteside, you have really, really underpriced Kenneth Faried. I think they're 23 and 19 respectively. And LaMarcus Aldridge is center only, and he's 34, and that is way too cheap in this spot for him. So those four off the top of my head are excellent point per dollar plays on Yahoo, and your center and utility spots, I think if I was building, they basically 10 max your lineups, I would be rotating through, basically even combinations of Aldridge and Towns and Vonleh and Whiteside, and I have a feeling there may even be another one, but usually that ends up being a double center position there. But love Aldridge without DeRozan. Pau Gasol picked up the start last game. I don't know if we've seen that yet tonight, but no reason not to expect the same thing to happen. Jan Mahinmi is out, who we did not expect to be out. That's an interesting bit of news that came apropos as we were discussing this game. I thought he was going to play. So the absence of DeMar DeRozan, let's assume Rudy Gay plays for the moment. The absence of DeMar DeRozan, again, mints LaMarcus Aldridge. We probably get starting Pau Gasol again, and he looked absolutely incredible in that last matchup. And this is a pretty strong matchup, too. Watching Pau Gasol make fools out of young athletic big men is a hobby of mine. So I do like his ability to give you a similar performance to what he did in that last game. Now, you may not get. I think he only played 20 minutes in that last game against the Pellies, where the victim in question was Jahlil Okafor. But I expect him to, if he wants to, really clown Thomas Bryant here quite a bit. $3,100 on DK. I'm a fan of that value play for Pau Gasol, but understand that there isn't really a safe floor there. You might get 12 minutes this time. You could randomly see a blowout. And even last time represented so you're not going to frequently get, whatever I don't even remember what he got in that game. I want to say like 35 fantasy points. It was a pretty stupid amount. I think 22 minutes. 22 minutes, 32 fantasy points. 6 for 8 from the field, 4 assists, a steal, 9 rebounds, 13 to 9, almost hit his double-double in that limited time. This is an equally good spot for him. So he's probably almost certainly my favorite uber cheap guy. Certainly in tournaments, I'd rather play him than, say, Elia Kobo at 3,500, just for what I consider to be likely much superior ownership. If we get news Rudy Gay is in, he's in a tremendous spot. I talked about this before the last game where they were not on the main slate, but I was helping some people in the chat. You take DeRozan out of there, Gay and Aldridge both get pretty goddamn exceptional at their prices. So when we get confirmation Rudy Gay will play at 57, 5,800, don't know the Yahoo price offhand, I'm going to be a really big fan of Rudy Gay in this spot. Any love for Troy Brown? Not relative to the other guy. Like, it's really hard for me to Troy Brown in a world of Pau Gasol and Elia Kobo and some of the other values. So if you are mass entering, and I think Sammy Decker is those minutes do filter around. What is the latest status on? He's still a game time decision, so you actually want Sam Decker out for that. But I apologize. I have 31 tweet notifications and like 11 messages. I try to answer lineup advice questions as much as I can, but we're just not going to get there today when I am on by myself. So I apologize for anyone who asked and did not get answered. Let's see, other guys to talk about here. You can always run Marco Bellinelli out in a tournament. Again, just, missing, clear your heads, missing DeMar DeRozan and his, 36 minutes, 20 shots, all that usage, and then match up with the Wizards, something we're a big fan of. Though credit to the Wizards, while as they still suck at rebounding, and it is to some degree influenced by some supreme matchups against both some shit teams and some slow teams, their defense over the last month, if you limit your sample size to, say, January, Washington Wizards come in like 5th in defensive rating. So shout out to them for that improvement. So Bellinelli makes sense in a tournament. I would probably prefer Bellinelli to Bryn Forbes. Derek White absolutely fine to play as well. Across the ball, though, I would rather play Tomas Satoransky than Derek White. 5,400 on DK is actually just too cheap of a number for him. He's a guy most nights that I end up projecting for 25, 27, good matchups like this one, 28 or 29. I like matchups of his ilk. We'll call them scrappy point guards with more of a drive and kick mentality. against the Spurs, and that's led to some GPP winners this year with the first Archie Diacono spot against him, and then there's just been a few times where you could pick guys who normally are not the most productive guys who fit a certain profile, and in this spot they do well, and that's Satoransky for me. 5,400 on DK, especially a number I'm pretty excited about. Don't recall the Yahoo price offhand. Beal always carries a big upside with him. The matchup not nearly so good for him, and the price, even a little higher than it's been recently. 99 on FanDuel, 9 flat on DK. Disinclined towards, but never out of play, just for his ability to bludgeon his way to the score. Same thing with Ariza. Don't really want to spend that nut on Trevor Ariza. Would rather Jeff Green between those two guys, actually, who I've projected for only a few fantasy points less and saves around $2,000. Not a good spot for Thomas Bryant. I do think he is going to be limited, although given the news that that Sam Dekker is questionable and Mahinmi, again, I want to triple check that this was seen correctly, is actually out. The Wolves starting who we expected: Bayless, Okogie, Wiggins, Gibson, and Towns. Rudy Gay is in. So yeah, I like Rudy Gay quite a bit. I'm going to take a moment and go ahead and check him versus some options. I would still prefer Wiggins. I would probably still prefer Brandon Ingram. So looking at DK, which is where most y'all tend to do y'all looking, would be more inclined to each of those two options by just a hair. But the ownership on both of them is going to be well north of the ownership on Rudy Gay. And again, if you looked at that, Mahinmi is out. Okay, if you looked at that last matchup with the Rosen out, you got 45 out of Aldridge, which was honestly a little disappointing, and 40 and a couple out of Gay. And I would project them tonight for like 49 and 39, and they both math out very, very nicely at their prices. So get yourself a Spurs forward, I would think, the vast majority of the time when you are building yourself a lineup tonight. Nothing new there. Sorry for the process time, but when I'm here by myself, I gotta occasionally check news and alerts and other things, so I don't leave y'all out to dry. Anything else to talk about in this game? Don't mind Otto Porter. Again, the DK price, obviously the superior one at 6,100. But now basically priced appropriately, or getting very close to it. He probably should be like 72 and 65. So he's approaching the number that he should be priced at, but certainly not out of play on what's a fairly short slate with 6 games. Let's move on. We'll come back to it in questions if we missed it. The Magic and the Rockets. Look, so let's assume you think James Harden is going to play 40 minutes tonight, and let's assume you think Chris Paul is going to play 24 minutes tonight. I don't think it is a strange assertion to suggest that Chris Paul is on the court for all 8 of the minutes that James Harden is not, meaning that they will share the court with each other for 60% of James Harden's time. Okay, James Harden's going to spend 24 minutes on the court with Chris Paul, we'll say. Wait, that doesn't math out at all. Let's try that again. He's going to spend 24 minutes on the court without Chris Paul, 16 minutes on the court with Chris Paul. And then let's look at the matchup and roughly think what we would get in a normal game with him with Chris Paul and without Chris Paul. I think you can honestly project him, and we're going to, for the sake of using easy numbers, project James Harden for around 80 in the situation he's been in recently against the Magic. He had, when they played just a couple weeks ago, that was the game in which he had 75, shooting 1 of 17 from 3. So clearly that game, if he shot average from 3, if he shot badly from 3, he would have had 93 or something. But I think 80 is a reasonable guess if we got 40 minutes of James Harden at 2 fantasy points a minute against the Magic with no Chris Paul, in existence. So, all right, we're going to give him 48 fantasy points in those 24 minutes he's going to play without Chris Paul tonight. Playing next to Chris Paul moves him down to a little bit less than, but we'll call it a fantasy point and a half a minute. And so that would end up being an additional 24 fantasy points or so. So you're moving his projection to still, in theory, if he plays that much time without Chris Paul, that would be 72. That's still a giant fucking number. And that, again, is sort of a reasonable what could happen number. Let's assume there's more time with Chris Paul than I'm guessing, which I don't think there should be, but they will obviously start next to each other. It's still, a decent spot. So that number is obviously way the hell up there. But if you're playing on DK after hammering in, or Yahoo after hammering in Towns, there's some decent value out there, and there's not a lot of spend ups. So it really comes down to an ownership question for James Harden. But we currently have James Harden projected for, pretty sure somewhere, 13%. I am not incredibly disinclined towards James Harden at 13%. I think I would project him for somewhere in the 66-point range. That's not overly exciting at 13.5, but again, there's only so many spend-up options. So if you just think enough of the value gets there, and you don't want to spend the full money on, let's say you're not playing Towns for some reason, or you don't want to play Towns and Vooch, or Towns and Gobert, I can see a number of places in which James Harden still lands in your matchup, and I would not cry in my milk if that happened. I do think there's a perfectly reasonable chance that he still ends up being stellar. Got to figure in the additional offense provided by Fareed lately, no? No, I don't think having Fareed in the lineup negatively affects Harden to a marked degree. You could convince me it's a net negative. I wouldn't even concede that immediately. But his presence in the middle opens up a little more room for James Harden. His ability to actually do something down low as opposed to center PJ Tucker makes his drives a little easier because the drive and dish is more of a factor that defenses have to take in mind. If we're talking about scoring on DK, having Fareed in there at least opens up the possibility of accruing some significant number of assists as opposed to in the past he was getting 0 or 1 a game. So I'm not sure I would even immediately concede that putting Fareed on the court makes Harden worse. But if it did, I don't think it would be by such a number that it would do much better than change a projection from 66 to 64.5 or something like that. I'm sure it's not a massive net negative having a competent center on the team out there. Okay, no relevant news there. Good question, though. I understand your thinking, but Fareed is not going to do a lot of offense on his own that doesn't come by way of James Harden. Fareed is not a great create-his-own-shot guy. He'll make some putbacks, and he'll catch some alley-oops. But so, again, I still expect Harden to be a monster. Chris Paul, I do not think is in play at his price. He will play 22, 24, 25, 26 minutes. Not impossible, but pretty goddamn unlikely that he's going to get there at 7,200 on DK. You could have a share in 150, but him randomly throwing up the 45 you need in 25 minutes is not impossible, but unlikely to be sure. Paul being back nerfs Eric Gordon a little bit, moves PJ Tucker from third to fourth offensive unit. I still like Kenneth Fareed just fine. He is again most underpriced on Yahoo at 19. On DK at 59, which apparently is just the nice price for a lot of guys tonight. Normally it's like, 69, but 59, the nice price for all those guys tonight. 64 on FanDuel, still fine for me, though I do think, 40 fantasy points a game out of him is more than you will see in general. By only a little bit, just because they are going to throw buckets of minutes at him. But I would expect that average to come down closer to 32, 33. The matchup with the Magic isn't exceptional for him, let's see, Danny Green in and starting. The Raptors will start who we thought they would start. Let us continue then. So anything else to talk about here? Austin Rivers with Chris Paul back will fade into obscurity. Gerald Green always in play in tournaments. You want to play $4,100 on FanDuel most especially. That could make some sense. But I still expect James Harden to do something beginning with a 6 or a 7 tonight, and even though that probably won't be super effective at his $14K salary, basically, there's still a number of ways the slate could break down where that would still be the number you would want. Looking at the Magic, no one, jumps off the page as immediately brilliant. I would rather play Gobert than Vooch, to answer a question I saw a minute ago. I would rather play Karl Anthony Towns than Vooch. That limits it a little bit, but Vooch still very much in play. Gordon also very much in play. Probably the second guy I would go to. They're the two guys on this team who you think have any chance of putting up, some very big number. Getting 40 out of Gordon, certainly not impossible in this spot. He's done it before. getting 50 out of Vooch, certainly not impossible at all either. They really don't have anyone who's going to do an excellent job of guarding him one-on-one. So you do have, 60-point upside out of Vooch in this spot. So I really don't mind playing Vooch. I slightly prefer Towns and Gobert at their prices. Not really a spot in which I wanted Jonathan Isaac. Not really a spot in which I wanted DJ Augustine. Evan Fournier would be the next guy I would play. Simply just, hoping that he bludgeons his way through enough shots to get there. But again, for me, he would come after those other shooting guards we've talked about, whether it be Wade or even $4,100 Dion Waiters, who I think plays 24 minutes now. Gorgie Jang is in. Not terribly relevant, but useful information. Affects, Tolliver and a couple other guys' minutes. Dang's minutes will get chopped down a little bit there, but none of those guys really should have been in play. Still really those three big mouths to feed on the Timberwolves. I'm interested. Okogie, were I to open a fourth mouth. Let's go on to another game. Let's see, what haven't we talked about yet? The Raptors and the Mavs. This game is intriguing for me just because I struggled to come up with a great take here. Not two teams we usually get super excited about in fantasy for no other reason. They both run silent, run deep. They get a lot of guys out on the court. They're both they're very deep teams. They both have they both have a very shallow degradation of talent. Like the Mavs have, Luka Doncic and then 11 guys who are exactly as good as each other. That's an exaggeration. And the Raptors have, Kawhi, Lowry. Like it's a little more of a subtle differentiation there. But both of them have a number of quality guys, and they're not ashamed to see them get on the court. So that makes us sort of excited. But this still does carry with it a very respectable 220 total. So we should want some pieces. On FanDuel, I like Pascal Siakam. I still like Pascal Siakam. For late slots, it's the matchup in the starting lineup I sort of like the most with how I expect them to attempt to defend him versus ownership versus upside. He's probably the first guy I'm looking at here. Certainly on FanDuel where he's 63. On DK, I do think it is right to play probably Serge Ibaka for $100 less than Pascal, as opposed to FanDuel where you save, I think, $500 on Pascal Siakam. Kawhi Leonard will be the forgotten guy here. Rarely puts up super ceiling guy. Certainly playable in cash should you land on him, and Giannis is now off the slates we are referring to. Danny Green will play, will start. Again, has had some remarkable shooting nights recently. No particular appeal for me. Probably even a little less inclined than normal, just due to him not being 100%. And Kyle Lowry, again, with Kawhi Leonard, I have very little interest in. It's almost like when Joel Embiid was sitting out, 40% of games. You just had guys who you just never played with Embiid. Not that they couldn't have a good game with Embiid, but it was so much less likely. And their prices were defined on the exactly halfway part. So, Kyle Lowry costs $7,500. If Joel Embiid is out, he should cost... if Kawhi Leonard is out, he should cost $8,500. If Kawhi Leonard is in, he should cost $6,500. And the price just ends up normalizing in the middle there, where he ends up being a good to exceptional play when Kawhi is out, and ends up being pretty unexciting most days that Kawhi is in. So can he have a good game with Kawhi in? Sure. He's played, I don't remember, probably about 33 games with Kawhi this year. He's had 2 good games. I'll look elsewhere. Fred VanVleet obviously gone back to the bench. 4,400 on FanDuel. I guess you could still do it if you are some massive Fred VanVleet devotee. Shout out EMAC in the premium Slack chat. Let's talk about the Mavericks. Dennis Smith Jr., I think people will be inclined to follow what is sort of the rush on DK. But again, as we got to earlier today when repeatedly talking about our potential options for the Timberwolves and a couple other teams, for the Knicks most especially, it's a pretty shit matchup dealing with the Raptors here. So, Dennis Smith Jr., even where he's still 5,000, I project him for like 27 fantasy points, and I still think he keeps getting his full run. $4,500 Dennis Smith at low ownership in a great matchup was, a GPP winner a few days ago where he gave you, 35 or what have you. I don't think this is the spot. I don't want him at that FanDuel price. DK, it's fine if you want to throw $5K at him. I, again, do think he's getting his full time, but I think you get in the 20s in fantasy points. Permanently underpriced on Yahoo, $14, $15 there. That obviously is a different spot, and I like him quite a bit there, though I imagine I would still have him behind $13 Bayless and $11, not Trier. There's a number of guys who are way too cheap there. I will look if people ask. Luka Doncic, pretty well out of play for me on FanDuel. I mean, out of play is a big thing to say for a guy with his talent level, but I project him for high 30s against the Raptors. 8,200 on DK. There's enough upside there that can work out. I can sort of see getting behind that, but both the FanDuel and Yahoo prices seem to be prohibitively expensive. Not a great spot for Harrison Barnes, at least cheap enough that you can just hope shit bounces in. For me, probably my favorite two guys to play on this team would be either Wesley Matthews, simply based on price upside minutes. And again, the upside a little flaky when we talk about West there. And DeAndre Jordan, who actually has a good history against the Raptors, a good history against especially Serge Ibaka when he plays centered. I went back and watched about 20 minutes of clips earlier today, and he does manage that situation fairly well. So DeAndre Jordan, someone I think in tournaments who will be extremely low on, especially 7,100 on DK. I would take a couple of shots at. I would be over the field on DAJ. Yeah, let's move on. That was pretty good. Making good time. That was extra 15 minutes. Make everything go down. Ooh, so much smoother. So let's go on to the nightcap. For the Suns. All right, so if either DeAndre Ayton or Richaun Holmes plays, they will pretty immediately become my favorite play on the slate. Again, the two slates we're really waiting for now, although I assume I haven't looked at what the late slate offerings are for FanDuel today. But the two we're really waiting on right now are the Yahoo and DraftKings, both of which have late swap. So this is the sole vaguely actually late game. Again, this 6-game slate is a weird one in that you have 4 7 o'clock games, which means this is going to be one of the best games of Daddy like ever. Or 2/3 of the slate starts as the slate starts. 1 7:30 game with the Knicks and the Heat, and then 2 hours later you get the nightcap with the Suns and the Lakers, which also means be especially careful with your late swap setup. Most nights as game gets later, you can just make sure that your guys who you think you may have to swap out are in your bottom spots, say on DraftKings, where they're in your forward guard utility. Really have a specific plan for, okay, I'm worried that, I've put DeAndre Ayton in there, by the way, who I absolutely love. Make sure you've set it up so you have the pivot right for Ingram and other guy, or... and the reason I mention this is I'm very, very excited to play Richaun Holmes or DeAndre Ayton if they are active, and especially in the case of Holmes, John Holmes. That's if the other guy isn't. So if both Holmes and Ayton are in, all right. So then the Holmes love will not be real. But if just Holmes is in, yeah, that's gonna be pretty damn exciting. And if Ayton is in, just for the ownership in what is a really nice spot. I like DeAndre Ayton a lot too. So my first comment on this game would be, since again we're looking mostly at late swap sites right now, if possible, which it may not be, like on Yahoo, it's really hard to leave a spot for those guys. Like, you need to take a ginormous goddamn risk. And it's like leaving a spot for Ayton, you somehow need to leave a lot of money on utility or center, and that just doesn't make sense building your lineup. If you're there now, you'll know what I mean. But DK, you can make it work a little bit. So, have an Ayton and Holmes plan if you can. Even up as we get towards 7 o'clock lock, have a plan now. Have a plan with your guys who are in the sole 7:30 game, the Heat and the Knicks, so that if we get that news at 7:20 that Richaun Holmes will play and DeAndre Ayton won't, that you have the ability to pivot appropriately. Elie Kobo is fine. I like him a little more on FanDuel because A, you can drop him, B, $3,700 on FanDuel really is cheaper than $3,500 on DraftKings. It's not an optical illusion. Obviously, certainly still playable on Yahoo. Not a spot I love with him. I am a little more afeared of his minutes disappearing than, say, DeAnthony Melton in the same spot. Melton, when he was starting, and we've talked about these guys a lot this year, and I've watched them a lot this year. And Melton, starting in this game, was almost certainly going to play 32, 34 minutes. It is still the likelihood that you get a significant amount of time out of Elie Kobo. I have him for 29 right now. But it is more likely, in my opinion, that he gets cycled out and you get some weird closing lineup of Booker at the point, Bridges, Jackson, Oubre, and insert here, Holmes, Ayton, Bender, something weird. So Crawford even. So I have some real concern for Eliakoba for that. Not a massive amount. And again, FanDuel, don't give a shit. He's cheap. I can drop him, cycle him right in there. Don't care about it. But DK, if he's going to be that expensive, I'm always sort of looking for... we went away from the thing I was doing at the beginning of the year, which is here's the chalk guy who's going to shit himself today. And I didn't always have one because I don't like to just invent it. But if I had one tonight, like this is chalk guy who I think has a real chance of failing, it'd probably be Eliakoba. And again, we'll never know because there's a very real 30% chance or something that he's amazing. Like you could play 28 minutes, have 40 fantasy points. And people will point at me and laugh and say, look, that man thought that Eliakoba wasn't going to be good tonight. But there is a very real chance that he's not playing that well. And ends up seeing 20 minutes and 11 fantasy points. And for that reason, of the chalky guys here tonight, we have him number 5 on our ownership rankings on DraftKings right now. We'll segue into this real quick. We have Rajon Rondo at 62%. I feel pretty good about that. I guess I'll say Daddy doesn't like it because I think I would want a little less than that, but not markedly so. I do like Rondo very much in this spot. I liked him in the last one, picked him up on my season-long team, and obviously demolishing. Just you have to. It's against the Suns. Like if it was an average matchup, you can start talking about, look, the guy is going to do his Draymond level goddamn shooting. He's going to take 7 shots and make one of them. So even if he gets 15 assists and 5 rebounds. He may not get there if the steals are, but it's just he's going to play so much time, and it's the damn Suns. It's hard to imagine him failing here. So I'll say I don't like it because I'd like a little bit less than that. Jared Bayless, 35%. I'll refresh to make sure I'm looking at our newest numbers. Yeah, I like Gay is in and starting. Yeah, I'd like to get some Gay tonight. I definitely think yeah. He's great, and I don't expect him to be owned as much as he should be. I will refresh here and see what number Rudy Gay comes out at, but I bet we have him in the teens. Oh, we have him 33%. We're giving people a lot more credit than we should. We have him higher than Aldridge. Ownership is updated. Rondo at 59% now. See, look at you guys. I found it right at the same time, but I appreciate those of you who sit and chat and like feed me tidbits when I'm on a solo show. Dear God, do I love you people. Seriously, line up and let me get on my knees in front of each one of you and say thank you, because it really makes the show a lot easier when I'm there by myself when people throw some of that data at me. So yeah, Rondo, 59%. I think I probably still have a little less than that, but I moved from 62 to 59, and it's really, like I was going to say, I probably want a little more than half. So the field and I are about agreeing there. Towns and Trey Burke, or Fareed and Gobert. I would play Towns and Trey Burke between those two pairings. But again, it's Burke. I'll get to some other questions in a minute. Let me finish the last game and do this ownership. So Bayless now up to 41%. Yeah, I mean $4,400, not that cheap anymore. But again, I project him for like 40 minutes and 30 fantasy points tonight. So $4,400, that's. At 41%, I guess I will say Daddy doesn't like. I would again want to come in a little bit under that, but that's very, very good value. Karl Anthony Towns, 36%. I'd probably go over on that, especially with just the lack of other spend-up options. Pau Gasol starting. Yeah, I don't see Pau Gasol on this list. And now, again, perilously low floor, but would project pretty similar to me to say Eliakoba with two differences. Eliakoba costs $400 more, and Eliakoba is 9 times as owned. Now, that number will come up with him announced starting again, but a really relevant factoid here that the Spurs were not on the main slate last time when he did his whole thing, so just many fewer people will have that in their mind, that he had a super productive game, but the matchup is extremely good for him. So I have very little confidence in him, but thankfully I have to spend very little on him. $3,100 for Boom Boom Pow. Very exciting for me. So me likey Pau Gasol. Checking news and notes, just making sure we didn't miss anything terribly relevant. Again, White, Forbes, Gay, Aldridge, Gasol. That's who we would have expected. Mavs starting who we expected. no other news of relevance there. So going back to the ownership for the briefest of moments, Towns at 36, I'd probably be over on. Gay at 33, we have here. Very nice. I would probably still be over that. He's incredibly well priced. Aldridge at 84, I would probably still be over that too. I think Aldridge has very near 50 and Gay really near 40. And those prices, I would rather play Rudy Gay than, say, Kenneth Faried in what's not an ideal matchup. Some uncertainty with Chris Paul back. I still like Kenneth Faried quite a bit, but $5,900, there's a lot of nice $5,900 plays today, of which he is one. Otto Porter, 26. I'd probably come under that. Don't mind Porter, but I'd probably come under that. Okobo, 26. That's about right. I mean, it's just super, super cheap. But I would come in under because, again, as I mentioned, I can see the fail possibility. Burke, 39. I like more than Okobo, 35, for example. Wiggins, 23. I absolutely love. God forbid he makes half his shots. He's going to score 55 tonight. Doncic against Toronto, 21%. I dislike. I understand there are 8,200 is much better price than FanDuel. I understand there are not a lot of great spend-up opportunities, but I'll pass on that. Brandon Ingram, 62. I actually like. 21% is about the right ownership. I'll stop there. But Dion Waiters, 4,100. And the guy we didn't mention here, JaVale McGee, who is 44 on FanDuel, 45 on DK. Yeah, obviously stellar-ass spot for him. I imagine Zubac starts tonight. I don't know if we'll have that confirmation, but the starter is largely irrelevant. We project, or I project, both of those centers for about 21 minutes, and you may as well save some money off Zubac. So I might prefer Zoo in tournaments for what we expect to be a lower ownership here. But I like both those guys as not cash, but very strong tournament plays. Let me look at the rest of the Lakers. Again, I mentioned I have an affection for Big Slim there. Brandon Ingram, Sammy Decker out. Thank you very much. Again, not changing a ton there, but making you feel, again, a little bit better if you're running Thomas out in some GPPs. That makes a fair amount of sense. Brandon Ingram, I like 6,700, 6,200. FanDuel, small forward, sticky almost as always. DK, that price really exceptional. You want Kuzma out, obviously. Kuzma himself in an incredible spot if he plays. So certainly keep an eye out for that. Again, I slightly prefer Zubac to McGee in tournaments. Wouldn't want to play either one in cash. KCP makes plenty of sense. Again, you're wanting Kyle Kuzma out. And Rondo we've discussed, so I think we're good there. On the Suns, I didn't mention Josh Jackson yet. I like Josh Jackson, priced especially well on FanDuel. I think the two power forwards I found myself most loading up today when tinkering with lineups ended up starting with a lot of Aldridge and Josh Jackson, and that's when I expected DeRozan to play and thought Rudy Gay might not. This is even better, so again, all my love to LA. But Josh Jackson I like quite a bit. TJ Warren obviously is still out, so his time and usage should be fairly minty. Ellington got the start. I would rather Pau Gasol over Wayne Ellington if the roster positionality isn't an issue for you, and I don't think Ellington plays enough minutes to be of value. He's one of those rare sketchy guys that I might prefer on DK to FanDuel simply because Tyler Johnson not starting, someone said Tyler Johnson not playing, I believe was the case. But in any case, I thought we had Tyler Johnson firmly out a little while ago. Now you guys are confusing me. I read too much stuff. Ruled out 45 minutes ago. Okay, I was going to say. Yeah, so Tyler Johnson definitely not starting. He'll be wearing a very nice tracksuit, maybe a turtleneck. I'm looking forward to seeing that, as I know all of you are. But that makes us feel a little better about... I still don't really want Ellington. I'll say he plays 24 minutes, and he does really nothing but take threes. At minimum price on DK, I can see doing it because he can take 9 threes and make 7 of them in that time. But I would have 2 shares and 150. Yeah, I would much rather play Dwayne Wade. I would much rather play Dion Waiters out of those guys. It's okay that you messed up. You were doing the best you could. That's cool. If you mess up only half as much as I do every day on this show, I assure you, you are doing fine. Anyone who touts, you have to be very comfortable with being wrong, because you're going to be wrong a lot. If I make 100 calls a day and I'm only wrong on like 30 of them, I've had a pretty goddamn exceptional day. Devin Booker at 8,300. Is that the price where we can start to configure him having an upside? Actually, the last injury he had on the hammy was when playing against the Lakers, because I remember Braun never wanted to miss a photo opportunity. The first one to check on him, make sure he was okay. He's a good guy like that. But 8,300 is at the point in which you can pick up an upside. I would rather play him than Donovan Mitchell. I would rather play him than Bradley Beal for the $700 and $1,600 discounts. And obviously, if this game stays close, he is going to have a lot to do with it. Wayne Ellington is starting. You don't say. Again, DeAndre Ayton and Rashawn Holmes, should either of them be in exceptional spots for me. Kelly Oubre is still in play at 6,000. Has done a much better job recently of accruing things like, well, not every game, but he had one game of 6 or 7 of assists. That's not really something you tend to see out of Kelly Oubre. And with Warren out, you just get those minted minutes from really 3 guys, Josh Jackson, Miles Bridges, and Kelly Oubre, and they're all priced about appropriately for their roles. I probably like Josh Jackson the most. Basically, you're paying 4 for McCall Bridges, 5.5 for Josh Jackson, and 6 for Kelly Oubre. I probably prefer Josh Jackson the most of those 3 at those prices, but all of them just fine at those numbers relative to their ability to pick up an upside. They're all absolutely fine in tournaments. We've talked about a Kobo a lot. There we go. See, those extra 15 minutes manage a lot. I managed to basically say everything I wanted to say about the slate. 7 minutes to spare. We can look at some questions. So let me check that, grab that, drag that around. Ellington and Winslow both starting. Yes, Winslow starts every game. He's the point guard. Ellington is McGee a great play? Someone said, I wouldn't say that. Doesn't he play 20 minutes a game? Yes, that's the appropriate response. I have both him and Zubac, I think, at 21 minutes right now. They're both fine at 21 minutes. They can both hit an upside, but it would be very weird for JaVale McGee to play 28 minutes again. Wizards have 9 guys available. 10, right? Brown, Robinson. Unless there's another scrub out I don't know about. I would not overreact to that news. The Wizards often run a 9-man rotation. The most they would run would be a 10-man rotation. So, some minutes are floating around. But aggregates, Freed or Vonleh on a DK GPP. I would play Noah Vonleh. Just an ownership thing for me. We have Freed again at a very significant number and Vonleh at a less significant number. Hashtag synonyms, hashtag anonymous. Yeah, we have Freed, 6th highest owned guy, and we have Vonleh lower. How about 7%? So yeah, I would play Vonleh. If Vonleh does not get in foul trouble, I would have them projected within a point or 2 of each other. So, Wizards available are Satoranski, Beal, Ariza, Green, Bryant. They should start. Randall, Brown Jr., Porter, and McRae. Yeah. Unfortunately, the absence of the other guys, all it really does is throw some minutes onto Brown Jr. Chesson Randall will pick up some time. Jordan McRae will probably see the court. Otto Porter maybe gets a couple extra minutes, but that does not really make a ton of difference. There's a point at which they only have this many guys makes a difference, but that does not radically affect their rotation at this point. It's relevant if another guy gets hurt or something, shit's going to start getting interesting, but that will not actually radically change the way they distribute minutes on that team. Yeah, the Heat starting who we thought they would be starting, honestly. Winslow and Ingram or Aldridge and Waiters, DKGPP. Aldridge and Waiters, because that way you're playing Aldridge. Jan Mahinmi is out as well. Yeah, no, and that's what changes things out there. But they run at the 5, obviously, Thomas Bryant. But also they let Green run around at the 5 reasonable periods of time, and we have seen a couple other things. So I don't think that radically changes anything. Does Ellington hurt Winslow? No. Ellington's probably better for Winslow than having Tyler Johnson in there starting. Bayless or Burke straight up? I will project Jared Bayless for more fantasy points. Will Cantor play? I would expect not. You would need significant foul trouble on kind of both of Vonleh and Mitchell Robinson at this point. You don't think they want Cantor on the roster anymore? They're a team that is tanking. He opted into a player deal and kind of should have known what he was getting himself into. They're tanking and developing their young talent. It's fine. Had they done this in a less dumbass way, I'd be fine with the Knicks not playing Enes Kanter. It's just literally they went, you're starting, and then removed him from the rotation within a 6-hour period. That's usually not how it's done. And that wasn't the only time they fucked with the lineup this year. He literally went opening day, starter, bench, out, starter, bench, starter out of the rotation. So just the process. You think Waiters throws up a million shots in anger? Well, if he's been drinking too much, maybe. We are coming down to it, friends. About 3 minutes to go here. I'm going into largely TweetDeck news scan mode to try to be as useful of a human as possible for you all for those last few minutes. So I apologize if I am not as hosty as I should be. Scott Brooks on the Wizards' 18-game losing streak in San Antonio. That's not good. That is not good. Yeah. No, you shouldn't be upset if you have Waiters. You didn't want him starting. You want him and Wade running the bench and jacking up shots. Derrick Jones Jr. in a GPP? No, I didn't answer. I talked about him before. I decided against it. Tyler Johnson, I just don't think does enough. Having Waiters back in there, the absence of Tyler Johnson shouldn't do that much for him. He should stay in the rotation, but not enough time. I mean, I guess I can Derrick Jones Jr. in a GPP. He has super steal upside. I would just sort of rather do it on FanDuel so you can get a little extra out of those 5 steal games that he's going to pick up. But I think, I don't know. I think the most likely game out of him is in the teens again. It's tough because he's just a minutes guy. If you go back and look at his, I don't have it in front of me. If you go back and look at his last 3 or 4 games, he's literally got like 10, 15, 20, and 25 minutes or some shit like that. So you're constantly guessing, is this the game where he gets it? But I guess maybe he gets it in the blowout. So I'm okay with Derrick Jones Jr. in a GPP. I'll reverse myself a little bit. But I'd rather have, James Johnson out, for example, is what I'm talking about. All right, looking at stuff. Yeah. No, I felt that was a good show. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. About 90 seconds. No, there is no overlay on DK. The contest, which is their main contest, which is attempting to rank slightly higher than 15%, may only rake something in the area of 14.8%. So no, that does not meet our qualification of overlay. Sasai. Waiters versus Burke in a DK GPP. I probably prefer Waiters by a hair now. That's a good question, though. Good question. Very good. Alright, we are coming up on lock and in for a really exciting game at Daddy Like. Yeah, yesterday actually was a really great show for the most part. I thought I'd shit down on a lot of guys who ended up being really bad and popular, but just the Sixers did not go how I expected. I thought Ben Simmons was going to get north of 50 and like a triple-double. He looked terrible. Corey Brewer outscored him. I had Corey Brewer as 3rd on my Sixers value list with Jonah Bolden as my favorite one, who was dreadful in significant time. Like, Jonah Bolden hadn't scored less than a fantasy point a minute in like 6 or 7 games in a row. He'd been really, really good and really, really efficient, and somehow picked that spot to poop himself in. Obviously, the arena wasn't that great, and just a floor game there. But, yeah, sorry for Jonah Bolden. I wasn't the only one. Jonah Bolden was, depending on the site, 40, 60, 70% owned. So it's not like I went on a branch and said, I got a secret, everyone, Jonah Bolden. But, yeah, I do not blame anyone who is disappointed with how that shit went down. Let's take a look at some ownership. I'm headed over to the $375,000 big jam on DraftKings. Says that it isn't logged in. Okay. Let's try that again. Take a look at some pretty expansive ownership here. God, Aldridge is only 40%. Towns is only 36%. Boy, let me tell you, our ownership shit is good. Look at some of those comparisons. It's amazing how accurate we were on a lot of these. These are really good. Bayless was actually 54, which is right on what we had him. Aldridge is 40, which is a little higher. Towns is 36, which is, I think, was that to the percent what we had him? Here, let me, I got 4 monitors for a reason. Let me throw this shit up on another one. That's amazing. You ever wonder what you're paying for with an Awesemo.com membership? And again, I get in trouble for every boss I've ever worked for not shilling for the product enough. I am staggered by how good the ownership projections are that this company puts out. We had Karl Anthony Towns at 36%. Karl Anthony Towns is 36.1% owned in the largest tournament on DK. That's pretty good. Hashtag analysis. Okay, so let's do some uncannily good job, everybody. Let's do some ownership. Curious what Rudy Gay came in at. He's not in this one lineup that I happen to be looking at, but I thought he would be lower than we projected him at. Here we go. Ownership. Again, this is 2/3 of the slate. Number 1, Jared Bayless, 54%. Yes, I would still want a little bit less than that number. Kenneth Faried, 40%. I would want way less than that number. I like Kenneth Faried, but at $5,900, you're starting to close off the upside. The matchup with Orlando is not the best one in the world. And 40%, man. Like, anyway. LaMarcus Aldridge, 40%. That's a whole different story. Karl Anthony Towns, 36. Feels good. Wiggins, 26. Feels good. Rudy Gay, 22.4. See, there you go. I got one over on the ownership projections. It's rare, but ownership projections had him at 33. I thought he'd be less than that. He was. 22% Rudy Gay. Is very possibly the best play on the slate. Luka Doncic at 16. Harden at 15. Again, that was just right. Feels good. Otto Porter, 14. Dennis Smith Jr., 13. Jeff Green, 13. Kawhi, 13. Aaron Gordon, 13. Donovan Mitchell, 12. Gobert, 12. Satoransky, 11. Again, I mentioned I like that a lot. Vooch, 10. Beal, 8. Feels good. Ariza, 8. DeAndre, 6. Feels good. Derek White, 6. Kyle Lowry, 6. Pascal Siakam, 5.5. Pau Gasol, 5.4. That's also... So yeah, Spurs was the place to go. And the best part is, against the Wizards, too. It's not like that random day where you're like, oh, we have some Spurs value, and you always feel nervous about the Spurs because of Pop, but they're playing the Mavs. Playing the damn Wizards. And you managed to get Rudy Gay at 22, Pau Gasol at 5. Thomas Bryant, 5.2. Bellinelli, 5. Eric Gordon, 5. Harrison Barnes, 4.4. Brendan Forbes, 3.5. Ricky, 3.5. Serge Ibaka, 3. Kyle Korver, 3. Terrence Ross, 2.7. Taj Gibson, 2.4. PJ Tucker, 2.3. Derek Favors, 2.3. Evan Fournier, 2.2. Jay Crowder, 2. Patty Mills, 1.6. Ingles, 1.6. Danny Green, 1.5. Dorian Finney-Smith, 1.4. Josh Okogie, 1.4. Davis Bertans, 1.4. Wes Matthews, 1.3. Fed Van Vliet, 1.3. Moxie Kleba, 1.1. Jonathan Isaac, 1 flat. Austin Rivers, 1%. You're asking for some help there. Dwight Powell, 0.8. Gerald Green, 0.75. Chris Paul, 0.64. DJ Augustine, 0.6. Dario Saric, 0.6. Royce O'Neal, 0.47. James Ennis, 0.43. Anunoby, 0.42. I do think he's back with the team. Simmons, 0.4. Deng, 0.4. Mo Bamba, 0.35. DeMar DeRozan, 0.3%. Congratulations, you played yourself. Last check of questions and comments from the premium Slack chat, and then I shall shuffle off and away from your collective assemblage. Yeah, Bayless and double ups like 90%, not surprisingly. Do I have a guess if Holmes or Nathan would play tonight? Would I go risk in DK single entry and cash? I really don't have any new information since the last time we've been through this. Tyson Chandler revenge. So yeah, there it is. I'll be taking your questions and comments in the premium Slack for a while. I will be handling your comments on the Twitter sphere all night. Until then, I'm back again tomorrow, though I'm not certain with whom. But until then, thank you for sharing part of your day with me.